Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. I have a project for you today that involves how to make a two-color binding. The beautiful quilt that you see behind me is one of the newest projects coming from Lisa Bongean at Primitive Gatherings. This is her fabric collection called American Gathering. We absolutely love this. I just love those rich colors, and she's put together a beautiful pattern, and Moda has made this into a kit and made this incredible box. This is so sturdy. It not only makes this quilt, but also one just like it, kind of the mini version. And they did something really fun with the binding. If you'll notice on my right, your left, is a navy blue binding, and over on this side we have red. And there's certain that needs to be in a certain location. So the point of today's video is just to show you one approach to how would you accomplish that two-color binding. So let's just dive into it. Let's see what's inside the box. So if you do grab this, you'll know what you can expect. And we have a backing option available that's not included in the box. There's a lot of fabric in here. A thank you note from Moda. We have the Primitive Gatherings pattern and this incredible bundle of fabric. There's so much in here, and as I mentioned, there's a backing option, and that backing option will cover both the main quilt as well as the mini. So of course the instructions on how to make the two quilts are included inside here, so we won't be covering that today, but we will just be covering about that binding. So again, if you already know how you would do a two-color binding, this probably isn't your tutorial, but if you've never done that before, stay tuned and I'll show you how we went ahead to tackle that project. And it was a lot of fun. I love the look of it, and I think the extra effort is definitely worth it. So we are including inside your box just these instructions as a guide. Again, one approach to doing the two-color binding. So I'm going to dive into that. We'll try to get a nice overhead shot of that so that you're able to see how we're approaching this and hopefully mimic that yourself if you like this approach. So I'm going to turn this around. Actually, I'll turn that sideways, and I'll turn these instructions sideways as well. There's 2 points that we're trying to hit, and that's here at the change and also here in the corner. So we have to make 2 different kind of bundles of binding. So looking at the diagram, we'll kind of zoom in on this from overhead. We're calling this binding number 1. That's up in here, from here, over across from here, binding number 1. And then binding number 2 will be this one here in that corner and down and around. And we let you know how many strips of each you would need to cut. Now Lisa's pattern has you cutting at only a 2-inch wide binding. So if that's your preferred method, by all means do that. We prefer a 2.5-inch binding, a little bit more meat available, fabric available, so that when you do turn that to the back, you can machine sew that down and be sure that you're going to catch that back part. So again, whatever binding strip size you like, go ahead and do that. But you will still need the number of strips that we've indicated, both for the main quilt as well as for the mini. One thing we did to keep ourselves organized is we labeled that mini flag binding 1, which is going to, I'll just open that up. We'll just deal with this one by one. We can see, and I'll turn this so that you're seeing it just like I'm seeing this project. Right there, you'll join your strips just end to end. Sometimes when we join binding strips, it's on an angle. For this one, we went ahead and just did kind of a butt joint, end to end, and pressed our seams open. And we did that for each of our binding units for both quilts. So you can see that point needs to hit right there. So right away, I'm going to grab a Wonder Clip and lock that in, because we know for sure we want that to occur, just like that. And then you would sew these down, of course, as you normally would. Now I'm going to bring this a little bit closer to me. I'm so short. So down in the corner, you would do what you would normally do to miter a corner, right? So if you normally roll that back on a 45. That's not going to be different, just like that. So I've got that little tuck in there, just like that. And you're going to come down. I'm just going to clip that real quick. We'll sew that together, so you're going to see how that actually happens in those corners, so no worries about that. And you can see that we're leaving that tail, so there's quite a bit here, and that's going to be important. I'm also going to show you a really cool join option that looks, you almost can't really tell where the strips join. So I'll leave that laying there. Of course, you'd clip that, and again, do your miter over here in the corner. Here, roll that back. So that's going to, you basically kind of have that little dome. And as you're coming down, now we'll get into that detail. Let's just talk about where these strips will begin, why we had to start there, etc. So we'll just kind of clip that into its location. And then we'll quickly talk about this other one over here in this corner. I want to definitely secure that down there. I don't want that moving anywhere. Okay. And notice here, up here again, we're going to leave a tail. So you're not going to stitch this all the way down. We need to leave a nice big tail for the process of joining those strips, which is really kind of right toward the end of our tutorial. Okay, that one's kind of where it needs to be. Now, binding 2, let's look at that. I'm going to turn this over here. Binding 2 is, of course, going to overlap by plenty. Leave plenty of an overlap. But you can see this corner portion needs to hit right in that corner. So let's get this one. This is our longer. This is longer, this distance over here. So right there, you can see that needs to happen right in that corner. Let me move that so the overhead camera can totally see that. That needs to happen right there. So you can see we would normally come down, stop a quarter, and we still will. We'll stop right there, a quarter short, roll that back, and then come back down. So I'm just going to kind of mimic that action so that I anchor that in the right location. Let me move our Wonder Clips over here by me. Turn that over. So we'll roll this out of our way so we don't inadvertently sew that down. And clip, 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 of course, and I'll keep clipping. And I'll come down, clip that corner as well. What we want to make sure that we're not sewing these up close to each other, or the joining technique will not work. So I want to leave probably at least 12 inches, if not a little bit more, where we stop sewing this strip on and we stop sewing this strip on. Then we'll have that gap that we need to be able to accomplish our join. So I'm going to keep clipping everything down. I'll go ahead and go to my sewing machine. Now, if you are concerned about your color of thread matching, I wouldn't worry about that yet until you get ready to sew this down by machine. We literally on this side used blue thread in the top and the bobbin, and on this side used red on the top and the bobbin. But just for sewing that down onto the quilt itself, at this point, you don't need to change that thread. But I wanted to mention that in case you want to make sure to coordinate your thread all the way throughout if you are going to be sewing that down by machine. So I'll keep clipping and I'll see you over at the sewing machine in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to start sewing here, back stitch. Now it's going to be very important. I want to show you this down here. It's very important that we stop that 1/4 inch before that corner. I'm going to actually cut my thread pivot 90 degrees and start back down this direction. So I've kind of got this little peak here folded this way, out of the way as I approach, and I can see this little notch here is my quarter. We'll stop there. Go back one more time. I don't want to go over it. There we go. Now this will pivot that direction, and we'll come back down this side. You can start sewing right off of the fabric or in that 1/4 inch saddle as you prefer. They really produce the same result, the same look. Here's our spot right there. Let's just double check it. Just going to fold my quilt up a touch. So I'm going to show you that corner one more time. So remember, we're going to, I can almost see that little flap there. That's the fabric. I'm going to stop right about in here. And we'll turn, move the fabric in the other direction. Just stop right about in here. I think that's because we want a nice big tail. We talked about that. Okay, for the other binding strip, we can kind of just talk our way through that one. We can start sewing kind of right about in here. We want to keep this whole area open. We'll come down in our corner and do the same thing we've done. Don't let the fact that there's 2 colors here intimidate you. We'll still stop our 1/4 inch away. Roll that over, and we're coming down the other direction. So the next thing I want to show you, in fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go ahead and sew that on, so it's just on. Then we will go ahead, and I want to show you that join. It's a really cool technique, and it's probably going to be your new favorite binding technique if you're looking for something that really has an impressive, clean, nearly invisible look of where the join happens with binding strips. So now we need to join our binding strips. And I mentioned kind of a fun technique, a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but well worth the effort. So I'm going to bring my pressing mat under here. You'll lay the strip down smoothly where it would naturally be. Make sure you don't have any extra gapping. And we'll do the same. I could have left a little bit of a bigger gap. It would have been easier, but if that happens, you can work with it. It's just a little bit more challenging. I'm laying this down, and I'm going to roll it back on top of itself and do the same here until they almost meet with a 1/4 inch gap in between. About like that. Now you want to give this a good strong press because you need to see these creases for the next step. That's part of the process. You'll be sure to get your marking tool handy, a temporary marking pen like a friction pen, a straight edge, and some patchwork pins, whatever your favorite pins are. We want to hold everything in place for this next step. Get those things ready for us. Okay. with the binding strip that's on the left, you'll open that and just pivot it out to the side. And I want to point out this nice strong crease here. That's what you want to keep your eye on right now. With the strap, or the binding strip, I should say, that's on my right, I will open that, and I'm going to twist that. And it's a little awkward sometimes because it kind of pulls the quilt in toward you. And this crease right here, hopefully you can see that, and this crease, see how they make kind of a plus sign? We're just going to lay those plus signs together. Go ahead and check your position on that. We'll leave that in place for just a moment. And with our straight edge, from this corner to that corner, notice I'm running parallel to my quilt. That's key. We'll draw a line, holding that in place really, really well. We do not want anything to shift between here and the machine, so I will pin, pin, pin. And we're going to sew directly on that line. So let's go ahead and do that now. Gather up my quilt here. I'll just double check my positioning again one more time. I think we're so well pinned, though we won't have a problem. But you can see how leaving a bigger gap, much better than too short of a gap, less to hang on to. Now, before we cut anything, I have done this binding wrong many times where I got something crisscrossed or my ruler was going the wrong direction and I've gotten this twisted inside itself. So check that it's going to be correct before you do anything. And by closing that, and you can say, yes, I can clearly see that once this bulk is trimmed away, that this will be correct. And I can see that. So you can try to get in there with a rotary cutter. I think it's just as easy to come in here, actually probably a little bit safer almost, with some scissors to cut that away. And again, over here. And press that seam open. I left, I guess, quite a hefty seam allowance there. That's okay. I'm trying to get my head out of the way here so you can see what I'm doing. And any extra fabric, you can just trim that away. So let's see how we did. Let's see what we did. So there's, oh, another little dog ear over on this side. And you could be kind of reducing that bulk there, kind of finessing that a little bit. But look how nice that looks. It's such a wonderful technique to join those strips like that. And then, of course, you're just going to sew that down. Once you have everything sewn down, of course, you're going to join the other binding strips the same way. That's where we just come back with our Wonder Clips. I like to roll this very firmly to the back. And this is why I really like the 2.5 inch wide strips. I really bind everything in that. And that's because you can see if I do go ahead and stitch in the ditch here, I will easily catch the back of my binding. And as I said, if you don't want that to be showing on the back of the thread, be sure on the blue part of the binding, you're using a blue thread in the top and the bobbin, and on the red side, a red on the top and the bottom. So you can see that a 2-color binding really isn't that difficult if you kind of approach it with this strategy. And it's really a really fun way to join binding strips in the end for a really professional and complete look to your project. So thanks for joining me today. Hey, share this video with a friend that might find that useful, and I'll see you soon on another Shabby video.